This time, we dive into one of the most heated debates that erupted following the latest Prime Minister's question session. Everything kicked off when Sarah Pochin, the new MP from the Reform Party, posed a direct and provocative question: would the government support a measure to ban the burqa in the UK? That single sentence was enough to spark a political firestorm. Progressive sectors erupted in criticism, while others argued that beyond the outrage, it was a legitimate debate about security, integration, and rights. And the UK is far from the first country to wrestle with this issue. Nations such as France, Belgium, Austria, Norway, the Netherlands, and even African countries like Cameroon or the Congo have already taken concrete steps in that direction. The question is simple: should the UK follow suit? The host immediately turned the question over to the audience, asking how many supported a ban. The applause marked a clear position. Then, seeking balance, he asked how many opposed it. The atmosphere was charged. It was at that moment that one of the panelists, Christo, stepped in. He didn't mince words. He declared that he would indeed support banning the burqa and laid out several reasons. First, he rejected the notion that such a measure would be anti-liberal. In his words, "We already ban plenty of things in this country, and the government interferes in areas of our lives where it arguably shouldn't, so banning something is nothing new." He went on to argue that the burqa turns a woman's body into a problem that must be hidden, sending the message that men are incapable of behaving unless visual stimuli are limited. According to him, this reinforces damaging stereotypes for both women and men. He also pointed out the inequality of the practice. Muslim men aren't required to wear such clothing. Christo expressed concern for young girls who are forced to wear it from an early age, and for the social barriers created when someone covers their face completely. In his view, most women who wear it do so out of community pressure, not personal choice. But the most provocative part of his argument was the parallel he drew with other freedoms. Those who claim banning the burqa isn't liberal should ask themselves if they would allow the burning of the Quran or the publication of cartoons of Muhammad. Suddenly, that same liberalism disappears. A direct critique of ideological contradictions. Next came Emily, another panelist visibly upset by what she called a twisted use of liberal language to defend something that, in her view, contradicts Western liberal values. She criticized comparisons between the burqa and medical masks or motorcycle helmets, noting that this isn't just about a garment, it's about a heavy cultural and symbolic burden. That said, she admitted that enforcing a blanket ban would be difficult in practice. Can you imagine the police going door to door to enforce this? They can barely regulate vape pens, she said sarcastically. However, she did argue that in state-run public spaces, schools, courtrooms, libraries, there should be a rule requiring people to show their face. For her, revealing one's face is a minimal act of social openness, fundamental to any human interaction. What troubled her most, however, was the idea of women choosing to wear the burqa even without external pressure. Why would you want to cover your face in a country where no one forces you to do so? It's like putting up an invisible wall that isolates you from the rest. The host then pointed out that, far from sounding radical, those arguments echoed decisions made by other governments. In Denmark, for instance, covering your face in public spaces has been banned since 2018, and there, it is enforced. The police can fine you in the street. The ban isn't just about the burqa, it includes balaclavas and similar coverings. In fact, another panelist, mentioned that the real issue isn't the clothing itself, but the justification for banning it. According to him, if the rationale is security, as was the case in Morocco, then there's a solid foundation. It's not about attacking a religion, it's about preventing garments from being used to evade the law or commit crimes. By this point, the conversation was no longer just about a religious garment. It had shifted to the balance between personal freedom, public safety, and social cohesion. The turning point in the debate came when a specific case was brought up. A suspect linked to the extremist group Al-Shabaab escaped from a mosque in East London using a burqa to conceal his identity. The incident, cited by one of the panelists, reinforced the idea that the full face veil is not just a religious symbol, but also a potential tool for evading authorities. While the forum heated up over the question, should the UK ban the burqa, with arguments bouncing between individual freedom, community pressure, and national security, a second debate, quieter but just as significant, began to surface between the lines. Because what was said out loud in Parliament didn't just trigger a media firestorm, it also set off a chain reaction within the very party that raised the issue. Reform UK, which had presented itself to voters as a united, bold, and straight-talking force that dared to say what other parties parties wouldn't, began to show internal cracks. Sarah Pochin's question about the burqa was seen by many as an act of ideological firmness, but for others within the same party, it was a poorly handled bombshell. The result, Zia Youssef, president of Reform UK, resigned, and his departure opened a new chapter, casting doubt not just on the leadership's stability, but on the party's long-term political vision. Up until that point, Reform UK had been trying to consolidate its image as the party unafraid to speak uncomfortable truths. But now, with the resignation of its leader, even more uncomfortable questions emerged. Was Youssef a victim of a lack of internal consultation, or was he simply unwilling to back a narrative he saw as needlessly divisive? What seemed like a strategic disagreement had turned into a full-blown institutional crisis. Back in the studio, the tone shifted. It was no longer just about debating whether the burqa was a tool of oppression or a cultural right. Now, the focus was on the party's ability to manage its own decisions. One audience member summed it up with a pointed question that made everyone pause. Would Zia Youssef have resigned if Sarah Pochin had simply said face coverings instead of specifically mentioning the burqa? The reaction was immediate. Some panelists agreed that the problem might have been more about how it was said than what was said. Perhaps it wasn't so much the content of the question that triggered the rupture, but the fact that it was raised without building internal consensus. In a party that preaches transparency, the lack of internal coordination left a poor impression. The audience noticed it, the media amplified it, and other parties naturally took advantage of it. The truth is, Zia Youssef wasn't just a visible leader. To many, he represented the party's more moderate and palatable face. His departure was interpreted by some as a strategic loss, and by others as proof that the party was willing to sacrifice internal unity for the sake of provocative messaging. The unavoidable question arose: is it worth losing leadership for the sake of one media-catching phrase? This conflict didn't just expose ideological differences, it revealed a disconnect between the image the party wants to project and what's really going on behind the scenes. Because while Sarah Pochin defended her question as an act of parliamentary courage, others within the party saw her move as an unnecessary risk, especially at a time when Reform UK is trying to grow its base among moderate voters disillusioned with traditional parties. In short, the debate stopped being only about a piece of clothing. It became an X-ray of the internal tensions within a growing party, caught between two competing forces: the urge to assert a bold, unapologetic identity, and the need to maintain a minimum level of strategic discipline to survive in the British political ecosystem. Several audience members shared the view that Youssef's departure was a regrettable loss. They saw him as a respected, hardworking figure, and above all, someone capable of connecting with a broader audience than the one Reform UK traditionally appealed to. One attendee even remarked, even without knowing all the internal details, it's clear that Zia drove the party with conviction. His absence will be felt, especially if the replacement isn't handled wisely. And so, what began as a discussion about a garment ended up revealing much more: the delicate balance between ideology, communication, and leadership within a party in the midst of expansion. The Reform UK case reminds us that in politics, how you say something can be just as critical as what you say. Can a movement that seeks to be disruptive survive if it fails to consolidate coherent leadership? That's the real question left hanging in the air. If you're interested in exploring more of these debates with unfiltered analysis and direct perspectives, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next episode.